start the recording, and that should get our recording started. Put my reminder piece of paper over there because I can use it again. And we are on chapter 9, last half in Daniel. First of all, do we have any questions that you've stumbled onto this week that you want to throw out first before we get started, or anything that you've seen that you're curious about or want to share with everybody? Just I'm going to throw that out before we get started on our study. All right, we will start at chapter 9 in Daniel. We're going to start at verse 20, but we're going to look back because the first half of Daniel, the first half of chapter 9 in Daniel, Daniel knows because he knows the books of the Bible that are in Babylon now. We know that after after the exile in Babylon, once the temple was rebuilt and Jerusalem and Israel came back together to the land and began to rebuild not only the temple but the towns and their land. We know a number of people, of Jews, stayed in Babylon because, as we've mentioned before, Babylon did not treat the Jews badly. In fact, they were treated fairly well in Babylon, and a lot of them made good good living in Babylon and stayed, to the point where in the ancient world, when we get towards the time of Jesus, there were three major concentration of Jews, not only in Israel, but in Alexandria, in Egypt, and in Babylon. So a lot of people stayed in Babylon, and with them stayed their culture. And that means that a lot of the literature, the Torah, a lot of the prophets that were at that time were there in Babylon, and that comes back. That comes back. We'll see that coming back again. But as we get as we start chapter 9, we notice that Daniel brings up the prophet Jeremiah, and he says in the last part of verse 2, he says, according to the word of the Lord to Jeremiah the prophet, must pass the end of the desolations of Jerusalem, namely 7 years. He knows 70 years. He knows that the time of exile in Babylon for the people of Israel is coming to an end, because it's been 60 something years, and he knows that that 70 years is coming to an end. So Daniel begins to pray fervently for the nation, the people in Babylon, the Jews. He prays for their redemption, for their turning away from Babylon's culture, to turning back to their culture, to turning back to their God. And he prays fervently for this. And not only, remember when we read, not only is he praying for the people, he's praying for himself. As good and as righteous as Babylon, as Daniel is praying for his own sins. So we have this fervent prayer from his heart coming to pass here in the first half of the chapter. And we come down, as Daniel is beginning to get to the end of his prayer, we come to verse 20. So we start reading at verse 20. While I was speaking and praying, that's Daniel, while I was speaking and praying, confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my plea before the Lord my God for the holy hill of my God, the holy hill being Jerusalem, the temple of Jerusalem, which is gone. While I was speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at first, remember, Gabriel had already visited him interpreting his vision earlier on. So um, this is the second time now Gabriel has come to see him. Uh, whom I set in the vision at the first, came to me in swift flight at the time of the evening sacrifice. He made me understand, speaking with me and saying, O Daniel, I have come now out to give you insight and understanding. At the beginning of your pleas for mercy, a word went out, and I have come to tell it to you, for you are greatly loved. Therefore, consider the word and understand the vision. Now, something special about this word that Gabriel brought. Not only is this word from God, now this is a word from God that Gabriel brings. But look at when this word was delivered. A lot of in our prayers here, when we make our prayers here, we know that God is hearing them. We know that God is working on them. But all of us are kind of thinking that God will be working on them sometime in the future. But look at what God does even without our knowledge. It says, I have come to, at the beginning of your pleas for mercy, a word went out. Daniel had started to pray when God was answering his prayer. God started the answer to his prayer as Daniel started the prayer. So not only does God hear our prayers, God is sometimes working not only to deal with whatever we had, one way or the other, but sometimes He's working on it as we're praying, and we all know sometimes He is working on it before we even start praying. So, right here in this short paragraph, we learn something about how God deals with prayer. That sometimes He works on a prayer in the He works on the prayer in the future. Sometimes He is working on it while we're praying, and sometimes He has already dealt with it before we even start praying. So we learn something about God's character right here and prayer. That it never, ever, ever falls on deaf ears. So after Gabriel brings that word, now Gabriel starts to tell him this word that he has come up with. So this is God's answer, and it's God's answer to his prayer about his people. Because remember, God, their exile is coming to an end. God has already decreed. In fact, we've already looked at it. We've already looked at it in the prophecy to Daniel, where God has already dealt with how they are going to get back to the promised land. So Gabriel says in verse 24, and this chapter, this piece right here, a lot of you are familiar with the 70 weeks of the prophecy of Daniel, the prophecy of the 7 weeks and 70 weeks in Daniel. This has caused more argumentation, debate, criticism, yelling, screaming. This particular prophecy right here has caused all sorts of conspiracy theories, regular theories, theological. It is a swirling mess of suppositions. So, and I've heard many, many, many different interpretations about this. But one of the things that I want us to go into this, and I promised myself I was going to do this when we started this, to myself, is say everything I've heard in sermons, everything I've read, I'm going to put them on hold for right now. I'm going to put them on hold, and I'm going to just look at what this says, because for all of those books, and I'm sure some of you have got some books on your shelf about the 70 weeks of Daniel, all that I have heard about that are in this paragraph. Look at it, verse 24 through verse 27. That's 3 verses. 3 verses. And all of this literature is about 3 verses. It's a it's a quarter of a page. So I want us to go into this with an open mind, put all of what you've learned back for just a little bit, and let's read what Gabriel brought from God, the Most High God, to tell Daniel about, to deal with what's going to happen once they get back to Jerusalem. So we are at the end of the exile. We're going back home. God is telling them, here's what's going to happen. And we start out with Gabriel saying, 70 weeks are decreed about your people and your holy city, to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, and to atone for your iniquity, to bring an everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. Know therefore and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to the coming of an anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks. Then for 62 weeks it shall be built again with squares and moat, but in a troubled time. And after the 62 weeks, an anointed one will be cut off and shall have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come in a flood, and to the end there will be a war. Desolations are decreed, and he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for a half a week he will put an end to the sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate, until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. That's all there is to it. The 70 weeks of Daniel right there. Like I said, this has caused a lot of consternation and disagreement and just downright fighting amongst Christians. So let's go at it and try and figure out what's going on here by just looking at what's written down there for us. So it starts out, 70 weeks are decreed about your people and your holy city. All right, 70 weeks. The Hebrew word there is a word for 70, but that weeks is a word, Shavuot, which is sevens. It's the plural of 7. So what it's saying there in literal Hebrew translation is 70 sevens. So 70 times 7 is the literal translation there.
Isn't that what Jesus said to Peter? How many times you should forgive somebody? It's
That's
70 times
exactly
7.
right. We find that same expression, even though it's in Greek. He's saying the same thing, 70 times 7. And Jesus says it. So there are two approaches to this, two major approaches. In Jesus's case, when he says, you shall forgive your brother 70 times 7, he's not talking about 490 times and then 491 you're okay. You can hold it against him. So Jesus is not talking about a literal 490 times. 70 times 7. He's talking about a lot, which is how it's used. In this case, we've got a similar thing in Hebrew. 70 times 7 are decreed for your people and your holy city. What makes this one different, though, if we look, if we look at it, we find that that 70 times 7 is beginning to be divided. When you look down, we see that there are 7 weeks, then for 62 weeks, and then the last week. So we have basically a week, 62, and then another week to make the 70. So it's divided into 3 pieces. So this kind of indicates that we are talking about 70 times 7 somethings. 70 times 7. So in my mind that makes good sense that we're not talking about a lot of time, just a whole, we're talking about thousands upon thousands of years. It's not always an idiom when they say, like Jesus said, 70 times 7. Although there are good, even conservative scholars that consider this as being indeterminate, and they're and we'll get to why in a while. But it looks like to me, and I'm satisfied with it, that we're talking about 70 times 7 things. And when we start looking, in this case, Daniel is talking about prophecy in the future. In our case, we have the good goodness on our side that we can look backwards. And it looks like that these weeks, these 70 times sevens, are actual, they're talking about years. And that is, we see that over and over in the Old Testament and the New Testament. When they talk about sevens, they're talking about 7 years. You're familiar with all the times that they're talking in terms of days being years, years being days. We flip back and forth. Our good thing is that we're looking back on history, and it makes more sense that this is 70 weeks of years. So we got 490 years that we're dealing with. So that looks good to us. Second point here about the first verse. Look at what it says carefully. Are decreed about your people and your holy city. So this 70 weeks that we're talking about is decreed about Daniel's people, that would be the Jews that are in Babylon, and your, Daniel's, holy city, Jerusalem. So these 70 weeks have to do with the Jews that go back to Israel and Jerusalem. So keep that in mind. This has to do with your people and your holy city. Now, if we look at the rest of that sentence, and we're going to spend the time on this first sentence here, because I think this right here is something I had never heard dealt with in dealing with the 70 weeks. But this first sentence right here has 6 things that, when he says, are decreed about your people and your city. And basically, here are the things that are decreed: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So let's look at how this sentence is divided up. And this really, I had never heard this before, but wow, that is a big help. So let's look at it. 70 weeks are decreed for your people and your holy city. Number 1, to finish the transgression. All right, the important thing is to look at this in terms of the Hebrew, because when you look at the Hebrew, and remember, all of you remember, I don't speak Hebrew. I look the words up. In fact, if you could see this screen right over here, this is the Bible Hub that has the Hebrew for that verse right there. So I'm looking it up as I go. And I have the whole internet with me, so I can I'm looking this stuff up. I don't know Hebrew. I don't know Hebrew. I use it a lot so that I can remember it. A lot of the times I will say the Hebrew also with the English, but that's not because I'm showing off. It's because that helps me remember the Hebrew. So let's look at the Hebrew that is said here. And wait, was it over here? All right, so this first one, if we look at to finish the transgression, number one, a lot of the translations, and yours might be one of them, it says put an end to transgression. My version says to finish the transgression. The Hebrew is kalel ha-pesha. Kalel means the le kalel. The le is a participle. It means to finish. The kalel is finish. But in Hebrew, and this is what drives you crazy with Hebrew, remember there's no vowels in the Hebrew written back then. There's no vowels. You had to figure it out from the consonants. So that's why there's a lot of argument. This word kalel is sometimes spelled with an H at the end, a hey. The H is not always sounded depending upon what vowel they place in there. So a lot of times you have to look at the actual word, but a lot of times it's spelled with a hey and without a hey, and it makes a distinction between the two words. With a hey, it means to end, to stop right there. I've finished this job. It's complete, done. So that's one meaning. And the other one is it means they use hay a lot of times in terms of arresting somebody, to incarcerate somebody, to shut them up, to imprison them, to restrain them, to put them in handcuffs, and restrain them. And this Hebrew word, when it says to finish the transgression, that finish is the translation that the word that they chose to use, but it's not that to finish, to stop, to end. It's the version without the hay, which means to restrain. So a better translation, if you want to mark this in your margin in your Bible, a better translation reading the Hebrew is to restrain or hinder transgression. So one of the things that we're supposed to see during this 70 years is a restraining or a hindering to transgressions, which is rebellion against God. Doesn't mean exactly sin. It's rebellion against God, which is sin, but the word is transgression, a rebellion. So one of the things that we should be looking for during this 70 years, 70 weeks of years, is a restraining of rebellion against God. All right, number one. Number two, to put an end to sin. Um, In a lot of the translations, it's making an end to sin. The Hebrew there is luhom hataot. Luhatom is is means finish. Um, it's it's to an end. It's to complete. That is a good translation. To complete. The word hataot, though, this one is one that, oh, okay, I see better now. Hataot, if we go to Leviticus chapter 4 and chapter 5, if you and we've been over this before in some of our other studies, it's one of the sacrifices in Leviticus that is outlined in Leviticus. One of the sacrifices that the Hebrews are required to make in the law of Moses. The hataot is the offering for sin. It's called the sin offering. You'll see that in fact, some of them will say put an end to the sin offering. Some translations will. So it is a it is a completion, not an end to, but the more correct translation of that Hebrew word is put a it doesn't abolish. That word doesn't mean abolish. It means to more put an end to complete. So the second thing we're looking for is to put a completeness on the sin offering that the Jews must make. All right. Some of you may be thinking, I'm starting to see a pattern here. Remember, we're talking about the 490 years after the Jews return to their land, start to rebuild the temple, and go forward 490 years from that time when they are told to go back. So some of you are starting to think, I'm starting to see a pattern here. So we are to look for a completion of the hataot, the sin offering. Number 3, to atone for iniquity. Good translation that there. The word for atone is kapur, and that is the same word that's used Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the highest holy day in the Hebrew on the Hebrew calendar. Yom Kippur, Yom Day, Kippur, Atonement, the Day of Atonement. This is when the Jews put that whole day aside to atone for their sins. And to atone means, if you look at the word at one mint, atonement at one mint, that word is to bring yourself back to being at one with God. So you're looking, the atonement is to bring yourself back to fellowship with God. You are to atone for your sins. And that word there is your iniquity. The word avon is iniquity, which is, it's a word, it's not, it's a word that has to do with uncleanness, with your condition that sin puts you in. When you sin, you are you have iniquity, which is, I think of like dirt. If I go out and play in the mud, I'm going to get dirty. If you go out and sin, you're going to have iniquity. And God cannot abide iniquity. So to make atonement with those sin offerings, the sin offerings is to atone for your sin. It's basically to make God acquiesce to your iniquity. The sin offering is to give you audience with God, to make you to be able to go close to God with your iniquity all over you. Being filthy dirty, you can go to God close by offering this hataot sacrifice, which basically covers your sin so that God can't see it. So, number 3, we atone, we have, and to atone for iniquity. So that's number 3. This is the 3 negative things that we're looking for. Now we go to the positive things. All right, the next sentence, to bring in everlasting righteousness. All right, bring in everlasting righteousness. Let me find out where I am in my notes here. All right, so the 4th goal, everlasting righteousness. And I have to look here because I don't know the Hebrew. I'm having to read it. Ulhebe Oliam Sedek. Some of you might have recognized that last one, Sedek. We've talked about that before. That is righteousness. If you remember, Jesus was a priest after the order of Melchizedek. Mal is king, Sedek, righteousness. Melchizedek was called the king of righteousness. Sedek is righteousness. And that olam, ulehabi olam, means a perpetual righteousness. So this one is a good translation here. It says what it means in the translation, to bring in an everlasting righteousness. All right, number 4. And are you seeing a pattern here? You're seeing a pattern coming. Number 5, to seal both vision and prophet. To seal, if you seal a document, it doesn't mean to close it up. It means to call it complete. When you put a seal on something, especially in the Middle East back then, a seal didn't mean it meant it was sealed, but it was marked as official. If you saw the king's seal on it, that meant that this was approved by the king and he sealed it and there was no more argument about it. The same, this is a good translation too. This is to seal, to approve, to make, to validate the vision and the prophet. So during this 490 years, we're looking for the prophet and the vision to be validated. The prophecies that the prophets made are shown to be true. So we know now because we see it. That's what we're looking for. We're seeing these prophecies fulfilled. So the prophet is validated. The visions, Daniel's vision, is validated. All right, and now the last one, and to anoint the most holy place, the Kodesh Kodashim, the most holy place. The place is not in here. In the Hebrew, is Kadesh Kodashim. That's the holiest holy. But Everywhere that you see Kodesh Kodashim used in the Old Testament, it is speaking of one place and one place only. You can say, oh, the most holy, that's got to be Jesus because he is most holy. But it's never used that way in terms of Messiah in the Old Testament. It is used in terms of that one holy place in the temple, the Holy of Holies, the inner place where the Ark of the Covenant is, where God, the Almighty God Himself, comes down and communes with His people. His presence is actually in this place. But in order for Him to be in this place has to be consecrated and made holy for Him to be there. And part of Leviticus that God gave the instructions to Moses is how to make the Holy of Holies, the Kodesh Kodashim, how to make it holy so that God can come there. So there is a whole ceremony. And Jeff, this is that red heifer. This is that red heifer. In order to sanctify the Holy of Holies, one of the things you've got to have is the ashes of a red heifer, a blemishless red heifer to be sacrificed, and part of the ritual to sanctify the Holy of Holies is that red heifer. And we've already seen it over there in Jerusalem.
Yep, they have it now.
So, six things that we're looking for in that one sentence. Do they all look familiar to you? We're looking back in history. But have you seen these things happen? Have you seen them happen? The restraining of transgression and rebellion, the completing of the sin offering, the hataot. Do the Hebrews make sin offerings anymore? Nope. Have they done it since 70 AD? Nope. They can't. The atonement for iniquity, our sinful nature, has it been covered? To validate the visions and the prophets, have we seen them come true? To bring an everlasting righteousness to the world, and to
Yes,
anoint the
Christ.
Holy of Holies. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yes, in Jesus Christ we have.
Yes, we have seen part of the the sentence that says, it has been decreed about you and your holy city. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Look for these things for the 70 weeks. And yeah, we've seen them. We've seen a lot of them happen. But we're still looking for some of them. So, in terms of measuring out the time of the 70 weeks and all the mathematics, and some of you have read these books, some of you have seen the mathematics that they've done, and yeah, if you count out if you count out these 490 weeks, you come to right around the time 20, 24, 25, 30 AD. That is when you end up, for these 490 years, that is about the time frame that you're looking at. Is the time when Jesus walked around here with us. So the time of the 70 of the 400 and the 69 weeks, when you calculate the 69 weeks, you're coming to that. The 70th week, though, that's the big that's the big pill to swallow. And we're almost at the end here. So I think I'm going to end here, and we'll look at the rest of this chapter and take a look at that last 7 years, because
Isn't that the tribulation though? I mean,
that's
that's
what
what I look.
that's what we got to deal with is
Yep.
the
It's kind
the
of a
the
stopwatch. It's kind of like he ran it all the way up to 483 years to the day where Jesus came up,
yep,
and he put his finger on it and stopped it.
right.
And
So
we're
we
at a
got
comma right now. If you
we
look,
know,
if you look at what Jesus said, it's almost like we stopped right at the comma.
right.
And
So
when he read Isaiah,
so we got to figure out what to do with that last week, because there's something obviously weird about it. So I'm going to pick that up next week. All of you look over this one paragraph. There's not much to read. Look over the paragraph. Look back over those 6 things and see if they make sense to you. Look at the Hebrew. There it is right there. There it is. Bible. I use Bible Hub. You can use Blue Bible. There's a whole bunch of apps that you can check the Hebrew, and it makes the translation. You can go straight to Strong's and look at the actual translation of the Hebrew. Look over it and see if you can. I have never seen those 6 things to look for in the 70 weeks, but boy, when Tom brought those out, I said, "Oh, that's the answer to the 69 weeks right there. To look for these things to happen." And they have. So look over this. If you got questions, bring them next week. Bring them next week, because this is when it starts to get really deep, really quick. All right. Any questions before we end tonight? Okay, we got a big old can of worms. Let's try and put let's try and put it back in the can for next week.
Okie dokie. Thank you,
All right.
Norm.
Thank you,
Bye,
Norm.
Yep.
everybody.
God
Everybody
bless
have a good week
everybody.
now.